It's my can you hear me? It's my great pleasure to welcome you here this evening and to welcome our special guest, Colm Toibín, blessed amongst women this evening. He's surrounded by his friend of long standing, his former literary agent, and his French editor, Maggie Doyle from Enniscorthy, County Wexford, and his translator of long standing, his translator from the start, Anna Gibson. Welcome. Well, as your numbers testify this evening, Colm needs no introduction. A novelist, a playwright, a short story writer, a journalist, and a critic. He's the author of 9 novels and many other important works of non-fiction. He's the winner of the 2009 Costa Novel Award for his novel Brooklyn. And Brooklyn went on, as you all know, to be adapted for film with Irish stars Saoirse Ronan, Donald Gleeson, together with Emery Cohen, Jim Broadhurst, and Julia Walters in the main roles. The film was nominated for 3 Academy Awards. Colm has also won an exceptionally valuable prize, the International Impact Dublin Literary Award for his novel The Master, based on the life and person of Henry James. He received the 2005 Prix du meilleur livre étranger for The Master, Le Maître, published by Éditions Lafon. This is a conversation amongst friends. They know each other, as they say, from the start, from the very beginning of Colm's oeuvre. But Colm is now an international writer, described as, you're nodding sagely, he's been described as one of Britain's leading public intellectuals. I think in Ireland we like to claim him for ourselves too. We're very glad to have him as a public intellectual. Just today in the Washington Post, Ron Charles, reviewing his latest book, House of Names, says this of Colm's work. A gorgeous stylist, Toibín captures the subtle flutterings of consciousness better than any writer alive. The Master, his 2004 novel about Henry James, is a wondrous act of imitation and reinvention. Nora Webster, inspired by the quiet life of his mother, is a miracle of restrained sorrow and joy. His play, The Testament of Mary, a monologue that earned 3 Tony Award nominations on Broadway, and later, when released as a novel, was shortlisted for the Man Booker Prize in 2013. Here, the elderly mother of Jesus is simmering with rage over the fate of her son. In April 2013, The Testament of Mary opened on Broadway with Fiona Shaw, directed by Deborah Warner, and was nominated for a Tony Award for Best New Play. It's been performed in Barcelona in a Spanish production with the actress Blanca Portillo. And in 2013, it was released as an audiobook with Meryl Streep. We're delighted to welcome Colm here today as he visits Paris on the occasion of the opening in French of his play Le Testament de Marie in the Théâtre de l'Odéon, directed by the extraordinary Deborah Warner and with the great French actress Dominique Leblanc in the role of Mary. So I'm going to start with one question and then pass you on to Colm's editor. We're going to have some readings. And please stay at the end when we will have dédicaces. We're very pleased to welcome both Shakespeare and Company and L'Arbre du Voyageur to provide you with books this evening. So, Colm, what made you write about women? What made you want to write in the voice of the Virgin Mary? Did it feel daring? Was it difficult? What were the risks?
In 2000, I gave a course at the New School in New York called Relentlessness. I thought it was, the New School at the time, well, it still is a sort of cutting edge place where a lot of hipster students come in from Brooklyn, and if you gave a course called Melancholy Irish Literature, they wouldn't come. You know, so I thought relentlessness might work for them, and sure enough, they all came and looked at me, and then I had to sort of think of texts, and some of the texts we used were from the Greek canon, Medea, Electra, and Antigone. And we looked at the way in which power and powerlessness work against each other in the Greek theatre. That the more the character is powerless, the more the voice is filled with texture. So that when in Antigone, Creon speaks, the king, it's like legislation, it's dry, it's got no flavor. It's like an order. But when Electra speaks, it's filled with tension. It's filled with ingredients. You don't know what she's going to say next. She takes over. So that powerlessness gives her voice a power. And so too with Electra, and so too with Medea. And so out of that, I began to think about ways in which you could use in the voices of figures who had been powerless in the past, and also the sensibilities of figures who did not seem to have moved out of the shadows, that you could get a great sort of richness. I mean, that's one way of looking at it. The other way of looking at it is that I was brought up by women, and that my mother had 2 younger sisters who were in the house a lot. My father had a sister who was in the house a lot, and I have 2 older sisters, and really, they were always saying something really interesting. And even if they were talking about a coat that one of them almost bought, it would be quite interesting how she almost bought it, and what colour it was, and why she didn't buy it in the end. And when you go downstairs, and the men are just sitting there talking about some goal that was almost scored on Sunday, and saying it was almost a good goal. And the other man would say, the next goal was almost a good goal as well. And you think, this is the dullest conversation I've ever heard. I mean, Beckett was a social realist down here. And then you go back upstairs, and they're all still talking about the coat. Well, whatever way they're talking, it's really interesting.
One question about Mary. How did you build your own version of the story? Because almost nothing is known about her. There are contradictory versions of what is known, where she died, where she ended her days. Ephesus is like you, or maybe Jerusalem. There is a Mary's house in Gethsemane as well, and all other things, where she was born. Was she married or wasn't she? How did you construct your own version?
From a number of things, I went to Ephesus, which is now in Turkey, and was in Greece. And it was in December, and there was no one else in the hotel except me. And I would go out every day to look at the ruins and to look at the statues and the archaeology, and come back, and they would feed me at around 6 and then leave me, really want to clear the table at 7. I couldn't understand Turkish, so I couldn't watch TV. So I was in my room on my own. But what was interesting for me was the idea of someone coming from a provincial place, that if Mary had come there, just the idea of the grandeur of the place, of the statues, that all of this would have been really impressive. But what I was also became interested in was someone who has not spoken before, who has not described all of this before, anyone looking at the idea of traumatic experience, and someone who keeps it in and holds it. And then when she's old, she has nothing to lose. She has nothing to fear anymore. And in one given time, perhaps at night, she speaks only once. So the length of the book is essential, that you must be able to read it in one sitting, as she said it once. And she did not say it again. And so that what came from her has a particular sort of intensity and seriousness and urgency, because it must be spoken once. Even if no one is to hear it, she must say it. She must go over it once. And I was thinking about ideas of fear, that she is in fear in certain ways. And I had also, that nothing ever comes from one single source. I had been spending a lot of time, for various reasons, with a South African novelist, Nadine Gordimer. And Nadine Gordimer had that lovely fearlessness that arose from her time in the ANC, from standing up to the white South African government and coming out the other side, and never having been imprisoned, but always the sense that she could have been. I listened to her very carefully. Of course, she was also Jewish and immensely literate and careful with every word, weighing up every word. And so I studied her, the sounds she made, her voice. I think she must have wondered, why is this Irish guy just listening to me, watching me so carefully? Well, it was because I needed her really badly for this book. And I hope she doesn't mind, Nadine. But so that all of those things came together in the creation of not as much a character as a voice, but not a disembodied voice, as a voice fully embodied, as it were. That was the idea.
So, and coming from that, both Mary, who is perhaps the most iconic of mothers, and Nora Webster, a mother, a very ordinary mother in a small country town. So how do you go about writing those differences? When you're confronted with two very different portraits of maternity.
I began Nora Webster in 2000 in the that sort of same period as I'm talking about teaching, and I wrote the first chapter of the Henry James novel, The Master, and the first chapter of Nora Webster. It was much easier to continue the Henry James book, even though it was set in the 19th century, even though it was set in glamorous places with many duchesses, and even though it was about a writer who I didn't know. The problem I had with Nora Webster was that a lot of it is, as you know, autobiographical. But the problem with experience is it's thin. The problem with experience, with what happened, with memory, is that it's quite hard to get an arc, to get a drama, to get a shape for it, when it seems experience by its very nature is oddly shapeless. So that it took me then about 14 years to finish the book. And what I would do in the meantime was anything. If anyone asked me, will you come to Turkey? Oh yeah, I'll go anywhere to get away from this book. I'll finish my Henry James book. So this play began because I was talking about the idea that that the story of Mary and the crucifixion seemed to me almost like a lost Greek play in some of its contours. And someone said, will you write that? And the answer was, yes, of course I'll write that. Anything to get away from Nora Webster. And so too with Brooklyn. In the middle of the whole thing, I just saw there was a tiny passage in Nora Webster. And I was, I can make something from this. So that Nora Webster was interrupted all the time, almost by necessity, as I kept working out ways of handling a story which was so personal, so filled with the contours of memory, and so difficult to do because there was no inherent, because it was like a line. And what I had to do with the line was sort of list the line and see if I could make a shape for it, rather than it being merely this and this and this and this, to try and see if I could find a pattern in the story. So in a way, all I was doing in those years was writing Nora Webster. The other things were just small interruptions, ways of getting away from the main task.
And, again, the thing, as you're avoiding Nora Webster, and as you write Nora Webster, you're also talking about, incredible detail of place, of, it's just the evocation that, we walk those streets with you. Likewise in the Testament of Mary, there's a sense of, her rooms, again, sort of the detail that's there. So how do you go about, taking these very, you were talking about memory earlier on. So, that memory that you have, and how do you craft, I suppose, the fiction with your writing?
I think that, two figures were important for me, or were very helpful. One was Velázquez before he went to Madrid, when he did those bodegón paintings, the paintings of just ordinary people in Seville. There was one which was a water cellar in Seville, and the other was an old woman frying eggs in Seville. And the old woman frying eggs is in the National Gallery in Edinburgh. I would go and look at that a lot, just the idea of how light would hit on ceramic, how the eggs would seem, how her face would seem, and someone behind her. And the other would be Vermeer, just the idea of someone in a room with quite a lot of blue and grey, and with light coming in from a certain place, but the table having this extraordinary vivid presence, even though it was just merely like shadow almost, but making shadow vivid. So that idea that if you start working on domestic space and giving it a sort of glow, allowing the shadows in it to work for you, then you can get levels of feeling that you almost cannot get if you're in a public square or a big train station or an airport or even a theatre, that you can get something from that quite emotional if you can just stick to the detail. What sort of, was the knife and fork there already? Where was the bottle? Where was the tablecloth old? Just those thinking. And in order to do that, you have to see it. And in order to see it, then you just have to keep imagining it, and sometimes using memory. But sometimes memory is no use to you. You need one more thing, and so you just add something to, even just what you're doing now. Yes. You add that thing,
And how do you know it's right? How do you know that it should be the stained wallpaper in the summer house, or it should be Gibney scissors? Or
sometimes you're just completely wrong, and it's the difference between night and day, that you often have a tremendously good idea at night, and you think you're marvellous. And in the cold light of morning, it's rubbish, and just don't write it. I mean, and if you've written it, take it out, so that it's a constant sifting. It's never, you're never sure. If you were sure, it wouldn't work. So that it's a question of having 10 things and using 2 of them, and then maybe taking one of those things out. So it's a constant. But I'm not talking about writing as much as just walking along the street. I mean, someone told me they saw me walking along the street in Dublin. I was looking bewildered. And I think, oh yeah, I know why I was looking bewildered. I was trying to just work out, would something work or not? And there was no point in staying home. If I thought I went for a walk, it might come. And of course, you won't go for a walk, and you realize, no, it won't work. Don't do it.
All your women, though, gain their freedom once they step out into the street, don't they?
Yes, but freedom could come in funny ways as well. I mean, in Nora Webster, she gets freedom from music. She gets the freedom from listening to the Archduke Trio. She gets freedom from just having a small stereo and putting on the record and being on her own with the music. So that idea of a rich interior life and someone actually building up a rich interior life, and you just paying enough attention to that you can actually get that from solitude, from sensibility, rather than from social life.
Yes, but to do that, she has to get out to buy her record player, her gramophone. She has to go to Dublin to buy records.
Yeah, that in both cases of the Testament of Mary and Nora Webster, they're written in the aftermath of something. And you have to be, just the whole idea of that, of people not speaking about what's really important for them, of silence descending on important things. And then out of that silence, something emerges. But so that in Nora Webster, her husband has died, but there are no flashbacks to their life together. You just understand that he represented an anchor for her. And it might have been easy to have made the marriage difficult, but I decided not to do that. Just in the aftermath, she's just lost something that really mattered to her, which was like an anchor. And that when she goes the first time to the pub, she's looking around thinking, well, how will I know when to go? Because with him, we would make signs to each other, let's go now. And, well, how am I going to navigate social territory, social waters? And then the whole idea is that that solitude, which Mary fills with her voice eventually, Nora Webster starts to fill with music and with also building her own life, not rebuilding, because it isn't as though she's getting it back. She's getting a new one. And it is as though she's getting a life at considerable cost because she's lost her partner. But it isn't as though she's going to live always in the afterglow of what she had as much as create another glow. And so you're constantly leaving out vast amounts of emotion and vast amounts of material and just sticking to the fact that, you know, she bought this new sort of water with a blue, there was a blue top to the bottle. Sorry, that wouldn't work. That's a detail that just wouldn't work, sorry.
Anna was going to ask you about husbands.
Well, because it's the same with Mary, right? The lost partner means everything to her.
It's a problem in a way that I can't solve in Irish literature, that it's very hard in any Irish book to find domestic happiness. That in other words, the English, God bless them, have Jane Austen, and a novel can end in a wedding. You know, it's very hard in an Irish novel if you had a wedding. Someone would set fire to the house the night before the wedding. The bridegroom would get horribly drunk. Something would be discovered about the family. You know, it just would not, the wedding would not work. That you have in the society a sense of domestic brokenness, almost as a metaphor for a sort of national brokenness. And a few times I've tried to repair this, to create images. There's a novel called The Blackwater Lightship, in which I tried in the opening chapters to create for once a happy family, a wife and her husband and their 2 children living in peace. But I soon broke all that up, you know, with death, with arguments, with misery, with all sorts of hatreds.
Page 2, I think, starts.
Yeah, but there is page 1 where she wakes in the night and her husband is peacefully asleep beside her. He's a nice guy and her sons are safe in their beds. I thought, I need this for once. But it's obviously a national problem, and I really look forward to the day when some Irish novelist will emerge, perhaps in the next century, who will be able to write this beautiful novel in which after love there's marriage, and after marriage there's domestic happiness. But that's not a novel at all, really, is it? I mean, that's just sounds like a bad dream, almost.
In the Testament of Mary, you have 2 very beautiful pages about domestic bliss. The morning of the Sabbath, when they go, she watches her husband and her son go to the synagogue.
Yeah, it was added quite late in the book where I wanted her to say, I want a time back. I don't want to be here now. I want to bring time backwards, which I thought is one of the things that happens with grief, where you say, I wish it was 2 years ago. I wish it was last week. And I wanted her to have an image of her husband coming from the synagogue with their son, and the idea that we're going to have this day of introspection. You know, I was talking to Jewish friends about the idea of the Sabbath and how much that matters, having a day of introspection and silence. Thank you. And so that is something she remembers vividly, because it's so lost that she thinks, I want it back. That is what I want. I do not want to be here now. I do not want what has happened to have happened. And so that is in a way part of what gives her the tone in the book, the fact that she would do anything to bring time, to push time back, that nothing has been resolved, nothing has been redeemed for her.
And you're talking about tone there, Colm, and I think at one stage you said that when you were writing it, writing the Testament of Mary initially, you were writing it for a woman's voice, for an actress's voice.
Sorry, yeah.
Go, yeah. So, and then, having written the play, which appeared in Dublin, I think in the Dublin Theatre Festival in 2011, you then used that as the basis for the novel.
Yeah, that's what happened where I mean, I was foolish enough to be just talking about all of this, And unfortunately, the director of the Dublin Theatre Festival was standing there. I'm not making this up. This is Dublin. It's a Christmas party. And I'm talking about lost Greek plays. I'm going on about this at length. And then I'm saying there's one Greek play we could get back. And someone says, what's that? And I said, well, it's the story of Mary. It's Mary as a Greek figure. And Lachlan Deegan, who was the director, just said, will you write that for us? And so I did. But the problem of the theatre, if you're a novelist, is there's no national library where the theatre goes. In other words, I believe in libraries. The idea that, or even a bookshop or people's houses. One night in the theatre, it was a Sunday night, I was standing at the bar after the play, and a number of men came up the stairs, and they looked like undertakers to me. I said, who are those guys? What are those guys doing? They're here to dismantle the set. It was the last night, it was over. I thought, all right, so this is it. So we just all walk home. Well, good to meet you, see you all. This is like breathing on glass. Someone has just wiped the glass. And whereas if you write a book, then it will go into the National Library and someone will be able to get it in the future. Even if not many people want it, someone will maybe want it. And as I walked up through Dublin that night, I was feeling really lost. I thought, I know what I can do. Because I had written so many versions of it and so many drafts. I have everything there. I had written a lot of it in longhand in notebooks. I'm going to get everything out tomorrow morning really early. I'm going to start again. I'm going to write a book. And in this book, because we had been... collaboration is great. It's wonderful working with actresses. And it's almost wonderful working with directors. And, sometimes as the writer, you feel you're the only person not needed. You were talking about the Oscars. I went to the Oscars as the novelist who wrote the film. Well, you should see where I was sitting. They couldn't get a seat further enough back for me, away from the action. There was no red carpet. You went in by a side door and got pushed along and stuff. So it's like that in the theatre sometimes when the director and the actress and the lighting person, the designer, everyone's taken over, and you realize, I should just go home. But no, you can't go home because someone wants a different line written. This line is not working. And so it's wonderful getting home on your own when it's all over, with full autonomy, with no collaboration. If I want this to happen, it's happening here. If I want to cut this, it's being cut here. And so there was a lovely relief about it. And that relief continued until Deborah Warner, who's directing the play here, came along again to say, look, we'd love to do this, but there's another way it could be done, with perhaps if you could come and work with us, which sounded sometimes like for us. And that was exciting some days, and other days I realized that, of course, the theatre is not only is collaboration, but it actually is, the light is on the actress. And the director's job is to make that work, and your job is just to provide some ingredients for what is a collaborative art. And that can have its moments of difficulty. You can feel quite small, and if you don't feel small, someone will be sure to make you feel small. And then you can claim full credit for everything that's happened, which is sort of nice too.
Which brings us nicely to the book and the fact that the book is yours until the book is translated. And does it continue to be yours? So we're going to ask Anna Gibson to read a little piece in French from the Testament of Mary, followed by a different piece read by Colm. And then we'll talk about that adventure.
So, it's about Lazarus. Lazarus is dead. He's been 4 days in the ground. He has 2 sisters, you remember, Martha and Mary. Marthe est allée trouver Marie qui pleurait auprès de la tombe. Marie s'est présentée à son tour devant mon fils et lui a affirmé qu'il avait le pouvoir de faire revenir son frère. Devant les larmes de Marie, il a pleuré lui aussi, car il avait connu Lazare toute sa vie et l'avait aimé comme nous tous. Il l'a accompagné jusqu'à la tombe fraîchement recouverte de terre. Un murmure a parcouru la foule qui les avait suivis. Certains se sont mis à crier que s'il était capable de guérir les malades, de faire marcher les infirmes et de rendre la vue aux aveugles, alors il pouvait ressusciter les morts. Il est resté un long moment silencieux. Puis, dans un souffle, il a ordonné qu'on ouvre la tombe. Marthe a poussé un cri, terrifiée d'avoir été exaucée contre toute attente. Elle a hurlé qu'ils avaient assez souffert, que le corps s'en tirait, qu'il serait déjà putréfié après ce temps passé sous terre. Mais mon fils est resté imperturbable. La foule a attendu, fascinée, tandis qu'on ouvrait la tombe et qu'on commençait à ôter la terre meuble qui couvrait Lazare. Quand le corps est apparu, la foule a eu un mouvement de recul. L'horreur et la peur se lisaient sur tous les visages, sauf chez Marthe et Marie. Mon fils a prononcé ces mots. Lazare, sors. La foule s'est rapprochée. C'est à ce moment que les oiseaux ont cessé de chanter et qu'ils se sont retirés du ciel. Marthe m'a dit que le temps lui-même s'était comme suspendu alors. Au cours de ces 2 heures, rien n'a grandi, rien n'a pu naître, rien n'est mort ni ne s'est fané de quelque façon que ce soit. Lentement, le corps sali d'argile et recouvert de bandelettes a remué de façon incertaine au fond de la tombe, comme si la terre le poussait doucement par en dessous, puis le rendait quelques instants à l'oubli avant de le pousser de nouveau, telle une étrange créature nouvelle venant à la vie en se secouant et en se tortillant. Ses bandelettes l'entravaient, son visage était recouvert d'un linge. Et voilà qu'il bougeait et se retournait comme un enfant dans la fraîcheur du ventre maternel qui sait que son temps est compté et qu'il doit se frayer un passage vers le monde. Déliez-le et laissez-le aller, a dit mon fils. 2 hommes se sont approchés alors, 2 voisins. Ils sont descendus dans le trou sous le regard de la foule silencieuse. Ils ont soulevé Lazare et ils l'ont délivré. Il était debout à présent, un simple linge autour des reins. La mort ne l'avait pas changé. Quand ses yeux se sont ouverts, il a tourné la tête vers le soleil avec un étonnement infini. Il a regardé le ciel. Il ne semblait pas voir la foule. Il proférait des sons. Ce n'étaient pas vraiment des paroles, plutôt des cris étouffés ou des gémissements. La foule s'est écartée. Lazare s'est avancé au milieu d'elle, sans regarder quiconque, entouré par ses sœurs qui ont commencé à le conduire vers leur maison pendant que chacun alentour demeurait pétrifié et silencieux. Et mon fils aussi, m'a-t-on dit, pétrifié et silencieux. Lazare pleurait.
And a few days later, then Lazarus appears, and Mary actually gets to meet him. He comes with his sisters to the house. Lazarus stood in the doorway and then moved quietly into the room. When he sighed, all of us moved towards him, and it was then, just then, that the opportunity came. And it was the only one I had, and I think it may have been the only opportunity anyone had to ask him. It was the semi-darkness of the room, the stillness of the air, and the fact that all of us 4 women, would know to keep silent about what we should not speak of. There were a few seconds in which any one of us could have asked him about the cave full of souls where he had been. Was it a place of massive, obliterating darkness? Or was there light, of wakefulness, or of dreams, or of deep sleep? Were there voices, or was there pure stillness, or some other sound like the dripping of water, or sighs, or echoes? Did he know anyone? Did he meet his mother, whom we had all loved? Did he remember us as he wandered in the place where he had been? Was there blood or pain? Was it a landscape of dull washed colours, or a red vastness with cliffs or forests or deserts or encroaching mist? Was anyone afraid? Did he wish to return there? Lazarus stood in the darkened room and sighed again, and something was broken. The great chance had escaped us, maybe never to return.
Beautiful in both languages. So is it yours in French, Colm?
Oh, I don't know. I mean, it's a curious business, isn't it? It's the last thing you think about when you're writing. I mean, I think if you started thinking about it, you would go nuts. Oh, what's this going to be like in French? Is it going to be mine in French? I think this is really, the sort of question that you must never, ever think about. That just get on with the next sentence and make it right, and let Anna deal with the problem when she comes to it, if she comes to it in French. But if you started to think like this, I think you could become very self-important as well as you were writing your sentence. Oh, this is good in English, but in French it will be, and the German. I had a very good early experience of this, where there was a review of one of my books in Frankfurter Allgemeine Zeitung. And the fact that I'm saying that might make you feel that I speak German. Well, I do not. I just know how to say Frankfurter Allgemeine Zeitung. And it was a really long review, and someone translated it for me, and it said that I was, that the novel was filled with philosophy and the meaning of life. And I thought this was very puzzling, because it wasn't. It was just a novel about a small town in Ireland. And I met Tilman Spengler, the German novelist, who had claimed to have read both the original and the translation. And I said to him, Tilman, what am I going to do about this? Because people are going to think I'm deep, that I had some deep thoughts about the meaning of our lives or something, that I'm an existentialist or something. And Tilman said, don't worry. You see, the translation is so much better than the original. You see, what the translator did was he got all those little sentences of yours, and he made them really quite beautiful and long in German, so that everybody really thinks you're very smart. So just go on, just don't deny it. Whatever you do, they'll send you home. So I got an early lesson in realizing that really, you can't ever take this seriously as a, it's when these books appear in Dutch, you get their real texture. I mean, shut up. I don't know, what have you...
Well, so if you have the chance, read Colm in German. So much better.
What about French?
Oh, it's terrible. It's terrible. I'm translating you all the time, but it's impossible, really. Colm has all these wonderful short English words and makes long, winding, beautiful, elusive sentences, and he has this wonderful use of the wonderful English preterite, in which you can put infinite nuance, and something that takes place in 1 second can be an eternity, and you can bend it any which way, and fill it with all sort of meaning, and you do that all the time. And in French, you just cannot. You have all these long, stubborn words, long verbs, and in the past tense, you have to choose all the time. You have 3 forms you have to choose, and it's one or the other or the third. You have absolutely no choice. So. My advice to you, if you have the chance, read Colm in English. So much better.
There's a Catalan translation, which everybody says is very good, of a story called A Long Winter. But I was doing interviews when that book came out, and the guy said to me, you don't really know much about the Spanish Pyrenees or the Catalan Pyrenees. And I said, well, I sort of do know something about them. He said, well, no. He said, no. You see, you have wild bears there in the 1950s. I said, no, I don't. He said, yes, you do. And he opened it and showed me that it was os salvace, which would be wild bear. But you see, the poor translator was working, and he saw wild boar, B-O-A-R. What's that in French? It's porc sangla. Sanglier?
That was a test.
So,
Sorry, I'm going to take this, dear, because you're really... You're
sanglier. And so he had just, instead of translating, when he saw the word boar, he thought it was bear. And he translated it as os rather than porc sangla. And it was just a small mistake, but then, of course, the journalist loved this, and he wrote a big article about it. And everywhere I went, people said to me, "Oh, you're the guy with the boar and the bear." So everywhere I go in Catalonia, people just look at me and think, a boar, a bear.
I remember the first time we met, it was the Heather Blazing, I think, and the only thing you were interested in was to know how I had translated. You know, there's a drunken guy, you know, shouting in the streets of Enniscorthy at night, and you wanted to know how I had translated "fuck the Pope." It was the only thing you were interested in.
How do you translate it?
But then, of course, you translate it into Chinese, and you have no idea what's happening there.
No, you don't. No, you don't.
Does that worry you? Do you just
No.
have to let it go?
No, it doesn't. No, I don't think about it at all. I mean, I think, as I say, if you started worrying about it, there'd be something wrong. I mean, there's a funny moment in some of the Enniscorthy novels. The same characters appear again and again and again. The same name, some side characters. And at one of the events in Shanghai, a young woman, very serious, stood up and said, "You have taken a character from one of your earlier books and used it in another book." And she looked at me as though this was something that under the new regime in China was distinctly forbidden. And I said, you know, but it was an accusation, and she had found me out that I had done this. And so I realized at least the translator had been translating something, but I had to explain to her very slowly and carefully that, you know, you could do what you like as a novelist. And the idea then, in China, the idea you could do what you like. And then China is so funny and interesting that I was explaining something to them, and it was an audience, and I said, you know, no, I could explain all that, but if you just Google it later on. I said, Google. I said, oh my God, I'm so sorry. I said, Google. I know you can't Google, but maybe you can when no one's looking, Google. And the thing about China, as long as you make what is really serious into a joke, then everybody thinks you can really say anything you like. Freedom of speech becomes a very funny thing in China. I was doing just one more thing about China since we started on China. I was doing an event with a Chinese novelist, and he began to attack the government. And everybody grew very tense. The journalists were writing. Everybody was fiercely listening and said, "I'm going to leave this country. There's more corruption, and the rich are getting richer, and the poor are not being helped." But I changed my mind because I thought, I'm famous in China, and I have loads of girlfriends. Where if I went to America, no one's ever heard of me, and I would get no girlfriends. So I'm staying here. And once he said that, everyone started to laugh, and that was okay then. I thought that's a very interesting way of behaving, which I think, you know, we all could learn from.
Yeah.
You were talking about collaboration because, you know, obviously you're here for the adaptation of Le Testament de Marie in the theatre. And you were talking about collaboration, about actresses, but what about collaborating with other writers? And I'm thinking of Nick Hornby and Brooklyn. And I mean, were you involved in that at all, or did you sort of say, "Nick, you have my blessing," or you know, as the writer, as you say, the man who wrote the book on which the film was based. Yeah. But what do you have any relationship at all with the man who wrote the screenplay?
What happened was that the producer they had done a film called An Education, which I'd liked and which Nick Hornby had written the screenplay for. So when she approached me, which was out of the blue, I said, "Can you get me Nick Hornby?" And she said, "Well, I could try." And then once Nick Hornby came on board, my job was to keep away. I did not have an email address for him. I did not have a phone number for him. I had met him a number of times, but I did not contact him as he was working, and he did not contact me. And that is as it should be. You know, it was his job to do the adaptation. I wanted him. I thought he knew something I don't know about making something like that work in the for the big screen. And so I met him finally when he'd written the second draft, which is very close to the final draft. And there was just one thing I needed, and I went to London deliberately just so I could tell him that he had the character of the girl calling her mother Mummy. And where we're from, you don't do that. And everyone in Ireland would laugh and think I was trying to be posh or grand about Mummy. So, and he said, well, what would you, well, you'd say Mammy or Ma or Mam. And he said to me, Nick said to me, are you sure? And I said, yeah, no, I'm sure. And he said, thanks for that. But in fact, Saoirse Ronan, the actress, would have corrected him in any case. I probably didn't need to do that. But he said, and anything else? And I said, oh no, everything else is fine. You know, and I wasn't, if you start as a novelist interfering with the screenwriter and saying, I want this back in or this taken out, I think you just cause everyone trouble. And you have sleepless nights, and you end up wetting the bed. And your job is just, I recently with Julian Barnes, I noticed, he just said, take my novel, tear it up, do anything you want with it, it's your job. I've written the novel, this is your job. But recently I with the German director Volker Schlondorf, who made The Tin Drum and who made Diplomacy. I think it's opening here next month, a film called Return to Montauk, and we wrote it together. And line by line by line, opposite of one another, fighting over every line, saying, no, Volker, no, I have. Oh, okay, we'll try this. Okay, look at this. And it was a fascinating experience simply because he had made so many films. And it's interesting to work with somebody like that, where he wasn't, because he'd worked with Louis Malle, because he had directed The Tin Drum, because he had made so many great films. He didn't all the time tell me, I know more than you. He became saying, I don't know what to do now. Do you know what to do? And I said, no, I don't either. So then we'd have coffee and think, well, we'll try this. And then I noticed he was working like that with actors as well. So it was a fascinating business to collaborate with someone who's so much more experienced than you and yet was beginning from scratch each time. So that was sort of interesting. But in the case of Nick Hornby, I simply left him alone. And on the night of the Oscars, because he was nominated for an Oscar, he was on the red carpet. And I was on the other side of the barrier. I sort of waved at him, and it was fine.
Taking a conversation in a different direction. In France, there's the whole concept of the écrivain engagé, the writer who has a role in society. You in Ireland have very definitely a role. You've spoken publicly on all sorts of controversial issues. You gave a very key address in Trinity before the marriage equality referendum. More recently, you've talked about writer supports, the role of the state in taking care of in taking care of writers in their later years. And
I think this has become a very big issue in America in the last year, of writers wondering, in the face of this buffoon who has been elected, what should writers do? How should writers behave? And I think there is, PEN America has always been a really important organization in relation to freedoms of speech, not only in other countries, but in America. So that I think there is a sense where writers feel not only powerless, but actually maybe that voice, maybe the voice, that the single novel appearing, the poem coming out, the group of writers standing in front of New York Public Library actually saying, we stand against ignorance, foolishness, and prejudice. We stand up for the mind. We stand for decency. And that actually the idea of a library, of the book, of the written word, of the well-written sentence has political implications whether you like it or not. And in this time in America may be more important than we think. But obviously, the problem with Ireland was it was like a sitting duck in a way, with the mixture of bad government and bad church, that you didn't have to be brave or anything. I mean, it wasn't as though anyone was going to just to say, well, what you're doing is so wrong and so stupid that, it needs to change. But then when it came to the matter, and I think this is very important in here and in America, what happened in Ireland, that at the time of the marriage equality referendum, because of the Irish Constitution, we had to have a nationwide referendum on the subject of gay marriage. And I mean, the problem in a way I had was that I'm gay. So if you say, well, I just want this right for me, and I'm part of a marginalized group in this country, the problem was that 30% were always going to vote yes, 30% were always going to vote no, and in the middle you have, as in America, as here, you have this strange 40% that you have to work with. And you have to work with whether you like it or not. And especially if you live in a city and you're educated, you have to be very, very careful the language you use and the tones you take as you try and bring 25% or 30% towards you, towards an idea of, for example, liberty, an idea of inclusiveness, an idea of, in a way, democracy, of just offering power to as many people as possible. So that in the gay referendum in Ireland, the group who ran the campaign said, why don't, as gay people in Ireland, we shut up? Why don't we just stop speaking? Just shut up, all of us. And say, and a lot of work in Ireland is done door to door. Bring your mother, bring your sister, bring your grandmother, bring your father. And your father just appears at the door and says, this is my son, he's gay, and we would like him to be happy. And he's a really important member of our family. We love him exactly the same way as we love our other children. Could you just think about us when you go to vote? And all you would do is stand beside your father, sort of nodding in agreement. And, I wrote various pieces for the paper, and I wrote speeches for some of the politicians, just saying, especially for men, there's a real problem with white men who won't change their minds. Middle-aged white men. I'm one, look at me. I'm a middle-aged white man who won't change my mind. And to try and get middle-aged white men to change their minds, to say, if your daughter came to you at night crying, saying, Daddy, I'm actually gay, I'm lesbian, and I don't know how I'm going to live in this country. I'm not equal to anyone. And I know I'm not, and you know I'm not. You would go to bed that night, and you would say to your wife through the night, is there anything we could say to her in the morning? I'd really love to be able to say one thing to her in the morning that would just make it okay, even just for a day, just one thing. And you'd go down in the morning to say, look, if you get the campaign going for marriage equality, I'll go with you, I'll support you. That, just to try and talk using this tone. And the other thing we were told is, on radio or in any argument, do not raise your voice. Listen to the other side, because people are afraid of change. People are afraid of outsiders. And you've got to be very careful that you don't actually make things worse by seeming to be smarter than the person you're debating with, or seeming to be angry, or seeming to be shrill. Keep your voice down. Sound hurt rather than offended. If anybody says anything offensive to you, just sound hurt. And in the end, on the radio, it wasn't hard for me. I said, I'm used by the Irish government for various purposes, to represent the country in various ways. But I'm not allowed to marry. I wonder why that is. Is it something about me? Like, what is it that you think is wrong with me that I can't have this right? The right to couple, which is the right to be with somebody else in a way which is public as well as private, which matters so much to so many people. Why can't I have that? Is there something, can someone tell me why I can't have it? And just keep your voice down, sounds sad. And in a way, some of it was theatrical, but we were given strict orders from the top. Don't shout, don't sound entitled, don't talk about human rights, talk about me, who I am, my story. And I think this is something that certainly in the American elections, when I watched Trump actually almost using the language of inclusiveness and Hillary Clinton seeming to fail to do that, I realized that often it's a question of language, and which is why, in a way, maybe writers are more important than we think, but also that in political thinking now, in the West, in America and in Europe, that we have to, all of us, be very, very careful as to how we approach that middle 40%, to see if there's a way of finding a language where that 40% can assent to without feeling somehow or other belittled or patronized.
Wouldn't you? Colm, wouldn't you like to become a leading public figure here in France? We would need you here, I think.
Don't encourage me.
I think we've almost reached the end of our conversation.
Oh God, I put a damper on the whole evening. How sorry.
We're going to open up to some questions. I'm not sure if we have a roving mic, so there's a question here at the front.
If you shout, I'll repeat the question.
I think we want to record your questions and Colm's responses.
Oh, right, okay. Oh, hold on, there's a mic on its way.
There's a mic on its way.
Is there a mic on its way?
Yes.
Great.
A slight change of subject, but just because of the time of it and what you were talking about earlier, I thought it's important to mention your new book, House of Names, which we actually are very privileged because there are copies for sale now, but it's not actually being released until next week. And I've read it, and it's extraordinary. But it's a story where you've taken another Greek classic, the story of Agamemnon and Clytemnestra and Orestes and Electra, and you've chosen, quite interestingly, to tell it from the perspective of different characters and give us an insight into their motivations, why they behaved the way they did, which seems incredible in many ways in terms of the Greek story of it. But can you just say a bit about what drew you to this story and how you became it?
Recently I was in one of the southern states in America. I was in Georgia, and the hardest job ever. I mean, you could get that 40% I was talking about easily compared to going into a high school to try and talk to students who are really bored already by everything and have everything on their minds except the idea this old writer is going to talk to them. Oh. So I told them the story of the Aristeia. You know, there was a king and he needed the wind to change, and he asked the gods what to do, and the god says, get your daughter, sacrifice her, cut her throat. If you cut her throat, we'll change the winds. So he got his wife and his daughter and told them, I found a wife, there's going to be a big wedding, come with all your clothes, dress up. Achilles, the great warrior, is going to marry the daughter, come. And they came, and instead of the wedding, there was a big ceremony where he cut her throat. And the kids couldn't stop looking at me. And I said, and then his wife was so angry with him that she decided when he came back from the wars, him being Agamemnon, and she's Clytemnestra, when he came back from the wars, she in turn was going to cut his throat. She was going to wait until he got into the bath. 1 foot, it's the most, if you're a man, it's the most vulnerable position in the whole world. 1 foot in the bath, 1 foot not in the bath. At that moment, she was going to cut his throat. And in turn, her daughter Electra thought she shouldn't have done that. She had no permission from the gods to do that. And she was going to wait until her brother Orestes came back from where he was. He was away. And I said, guess what happened when Orestes came back? And they all nodded. He cut his mother's throat. I said, yes, he cut his mother's throat. And not only his mother, but his mother had taken a lover called Aegisthus. And he cut his throat as well. And so they all looked at me. And it was hard to think what to say next because, and of course, the reason I wrote the book, I mean, this is one of the great stories. I mean, you cannot, like, if you know. And what I became interested in was the figure that Euripides wrote a late play called Iphigenia in Aulis, which tells the story more from Clytemnestra's point of view than from Electra's. So you see her as the mother lured into this terrible position and the rage she felt quite rightly, and you almost feel that she was justified in cutting Agamemnon. By the way, he comes back from the wars with Cassandra, who's all dressed in red, is looking tremendous. And of course she gets her throat cut. Anyway, but I became interested in the figure of Orestes, the figure of the younger brother, the figure who has been away. Where was he? What happened to him? I really, for a Greek play, you can have anyone kill anyone. It's just great. And they're always doing it, and it's fine. For a contemporary novel, if you have someone who's going to kill their mother, unless they're a psychopath, and he wasn't a psychopath in my novel, therefore you have to build it very slowly over many pages, the idea that he is actually going to ready himself to do this, that the pressure on him from trauma in childhood, that he actually witnessed his sister being sacrificed. No one knew that. And then he was kidnapped, and he was away for 10 years. And then when he returned, he sort of blamed his mother for having caused the kidnapping or having overseen it. And slowly he becomes, you're leading up to the sentence, which will appear later in the book, he was someone who would do anything. But he's quiet. And it was one of the things I noticed when I wrote about Northern Ireland, that often you would find the person who had done the shooting or the bombing, and the worst one, was often the quiet one, the younger brother, the one who seemed to be smiling most, the one who was easy with his family, who everyone seemed to like. Actually, under certain pressure, at night, he would go out and do anything and come home and be easy in the domestic space. And so I became interested in that idea of that evil doesn't look like evil. It often looks sweet. It often looks harmless. It often looks passive. And so I started to work with the figure of Orestes, the one who murders his mother, in this context. So his sister becomes the controlling figure, and he becomes the one who will do something. She'll never do it. He'll do it. And so the novel is called House of Names, and it's an effort to retell, not in a modern context, because my novel is still set in ancient Greece, but I suppose in a modern idiom, in the sense that you need to build up elements of sort of the psychological pressures or psychological tensions, so that the story seems to be true, or you can easily imagine it. So that's what the novel is. Really? Oh, I didn't know that. Okay. Just be careful with it, because it's not, there are lots of, don't leave it around the house for your children to read or anything like that.
Anyone else like to ask a question? Person in the middle there, the white hair.
Thank you very much. I'd like to talk about place. I'd like to talk about the setting of a story. It seems to me that most of your stories have been set in Ireland. I saw one title called Brooklyn. I suppose that was set in Brooklyn. But I'm thinking of Patrick White, who won the Nobel Prize, I think it was in 1974, who left England and went to Australia, and he found that Australians were very, very odd people. And I'm wondering if you went to somewhere perhaps more exotic, whether you would, in very unfamiliar surroundings, find inspiration for something, quite excitingly different.
Well, I wrote The Master, which is set about Henry James, but the idea of space, for me, is essential. I find it very difficult to imagine spaces. So I tend to use a space I know, somewhere I can actually see. Now, with ancient Greece, this is slightly difficult, but nonetheless, I didn't need to draw the palace, its configuration, where the rooms were, how you went down and down into further spaces. I had it so completely in my head as space before I began that I could then place the characters there. But often with some of the Irish novels, I'm using a precise house that I know, sometimes the house I was brought up in, sometimes a house belonging to somebody else. But even with Brooklyn, my friend Bob Sullivan lives in Brooklyn. I've emphatically used his house in Clinton Street, as where the door, the window, the whole, in fact, the basement had a separate entrance. All of those, and also the whole idea of American space, where the heating that comes up, there's so much heating on through the night. The fact that wood tends to be much thinner, so you can hear sounds in an American house much more. So all of those things would, for me, would be almost, I would have to start with them. I'd have to know them inside out, where the light switch was. Is the light switch inside the room, the left or the right? If there's a lamp, what sort of switch does the lamp have? Where's the bed in the room? Is there a sofa? If there's a fire lighting, where's the coal, or what sort of fire is it? So all of that would be there to start with. And then you can start bringing the characters into that space. But the place, and in Enniscorthy, which I named the town, you really could rebuild the town. In other words, if I say turn left there and you'll find the river, well, if you go to Enniscorthy, you'll find turn left there, there's a river. And if I describe how the river flows at a certain point beyond the bridge as it's going towards Wexford, that is how the river flows at that point. It flows in a different way before the bridge. So that all of that, I can see it absolutely clearly, as though I've taken a lot of photographs or done a lot of drawings, as though I've had an architect involved. Before then I can start working with the other business, which is the business of bringing in imagined or half imagined or fully imagined characters into those spaces. Well, you see, I found Dublin tremendously exotic, and I still do. And I've never been able to write about it. That somehow or other, for me, the thing that I can do best with is if I've lost a place, or almost lost it, or feel that it's fading from me, that I can sort of try and recover it. So that at the moment I'm working on, I had a really nice apartment in New York by a complete accident for 3 semesters. I don't have it anymore. Someone else lives there. I had to go around one night because I'd left my stuff behind and looked at it, and I realized, now I can write about it. Now that I don't have it anymore, the view from the window, the exact way the corridors went, all of that I can use as place. But it would be very difficult to set a novel for me, say, in Brazil. It would be really hard to know what history has done, the importance of religion, how poverty has worked. I just wouldn't know what to do. So that I know someone like Graham Greene or the Irish novelist Brian Moore really got nourished by the idea of utterly unfamiliar places, and they could invoke them or evoke them. But I can't do that.
You did Argentina.
Yes, but I did it with Argentina in The Story of the Night, but I had lost Argentina. I did it when I had really thought of moving there and living there. I did it with Barcelona in the south, but again it was somewhere when I wrote that novel, having come back to Ireland, feeling I will never live in those streets again. That apartment that she lives in, I had lived in. And that chair she sits in was the chair I left behind that I wish I still had. And so all of that idea of longing and loss is what animates the thing. So I probably could do Brazil, but only if I spent 5 years there and then ignominiously came home. Thought, I wish I was in Brazil now. Well, you can be. You can actually write a novel now.
Lady in the 7th row.
I wanted to know do you write every day?
No. Do I write every day? No. No, there are times I don't write at all, but I'm always thinking about something, and that means then when I get to do it, I can work very hard on a given day. There's an Irish historian biographer called Roy Foster, and he wrote the big 2-volume biography of Yeats, and he wrote Modern Ireland. He's always writing these big books, and when he's not writing big books, he's writing little books. He's always writing something. I told him that I finish every day at 6 o'clock, and he said, that's absolute madness. You must stop at 6, watch the news, or just have tea or do something, and then go back at 7 until midnight, 4 nights a week, when you're working. And that really changed everything for me. I'm really susceptible. If anyone gives me advice, I always take it. And so I started to do that and found that 5 hours was really fruitful, and you could do a lot of work then. But no, I don't write every day. No, I haven't written for ages now. but I'm going to start again soon.
Oh, there's a flurry of hands here. A lady there in the blue, in front.
Thank you. What do you say to people who hurl accusations of appropriation at you? How dare you speak in a woman's voice or appropriate the story of my religion and twist it? What do you respond to those accusations?
It's a really difficult question because it's become a very important matter in relation to something like race. In the case, there was a famous case in America where the novelist William Styron wrote Confessions of Nat Turner, and that book was based on a slave narrative, and he had made it as a white man. He had written a novel using a slave's voice, and I think 12 of the main African-American intellectuals wrote a book saying that he should not do this, could not do it, must not do it. And then in the middle of the whole thing, James Baldwin just simply said, this story is ours. You know, it's our story as humans. The idea is you cannot tell a writer what the writer can imagine. But nonetheless, it remains an interesting argument. I have to say that the two best descriptions or two of the best descriptions I know of men having sex with each other. One is written by Annie Proulx, and the other is written by Pat Barker. And I said to both, I met both of them and said, you know a lot about men having sex with each other, and they both sort of nodded wisely, meaning, you know, that's what the imagination is for. But you know, the biggest issue for me has been the use of family. You know, the use of things that actually happened, and that other people were implicated in, and I think that's something you never feel sure about. As regards women and men, I'm not quite sure that my own gender is that secure. And I'm living in a country for some of the year now in America where that whole idea of fluid gender has become quite important. But I'm not sure my own gender is that secure. But it's not as simple as that. It's also that idea I was talking about of something came on my mind when my mother and her sisters and my father's sister, when they died, and that world had disappeared. That it was not going to come back. And the only way I could, like space, the only way I could get it back was by writing about it. And no one else could do it except me. You know, I was the one who started to imagine it. It was on my mind, and it wasn't going to go away. And I wasn't going to stop myself feeling, do I have a right to do this? Could I try and get this right or not? And, so you really can't make rules. And it doesn't mean you don't feel guilty. It doesn't mean you feel right. Maybe we should all of us. You know that there's a guy in Norway. What's his name? Skausgård, or what's his name? What? Yeah, him. Maybe you should just describe yourself and what you do over and over and over. But I mean, I know his work, that his life seems to be very boring, but it's not as boring as mine. And so if I just wrote about myself and what I was thinking and doing, it really would be the most tedious thing you'd ever read. And I just couldn't do it. I mean, I just wouldn't do it. I couldn't even start it, let alone finish it. Whereas other people are very interesting, including women.
Gentleman in the middle there.
Yes, two quick questions. Any particular reason, or does Webster have a particular significance for you? And The Master, did that title spring to mind as soon as you thought of writing the book? And could you have imagined another title for the book? And is Henry James, for you, The Master?
The second one first. The working title for The Master was The Turn of the Century, because it was going to end with the 19th century becoming the 20th. And I got talked out of that one. The last volume of Leonard Dell's biography of Henry James of the volume is called The Master. He was called The Master by younger writers, especially in England, in his later years. And once someone said, look, the turn of the century will give us no clue. People will think it's about something else. And so it became The Master. And I suppose, yes, for the novel in English, he is the sort of Tolstoy. In other words, he is the Flaubert. He is the one who worked out a way of describing consciousness and of having a governing consciousness in a novel and a single point of view. And he refined, in a way, what earlier English novelists such as Dickens and George Eliot had done. And he is a sort of towering figure in that sense. It was all disrupted by James Joyce very soon, but he had a brief period as the master, which is what I'm interested in. Just sorry, remind me what the first question. Oh, Webster. In Wexford, where I'm from, it would be quite a common name. And then I loved the idea of Webb and Webster, that she's somebody who actually is slightly hard to read. It's not as though she's either good or bad. It's not as though she's selfless or selfish. She's sort of in between, and she's also caught economically in a certain place and caught emotionally as well. So I just thought, oh, it's such a great word, Webster, as though she makes webs or weaves webs, or that there's a web somewhere. So, but it's also, where we're from, it's quite a common name. It wouldn't be an unusual name in the town.
It's getting cold, and I know that you all want to buy copies of Le Testament de Marie, of Nora Webster, and shortly to attend the play in Théâtre de l'Odéon, Le Testament de Marie. So all that remains for me to do is to thank you all very much for coming, to thank Maggie Doyle from Édition Lafon and Anna Gibson, the editrice, the traductrice, and of course our guest of honor, Colm Toibín. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Okay.
So Colm will be signing books in the hall inside, I think, because it's a little chilly.
Do I have to go in, or do I have to? Are you signing it here? Yeah. Do I have to go in?